The grand ballroom of Rosewood Manor sparkled with thousands of crystal lights, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors. Natalia Rosewood stood before the ornate mirror in her bridal suite, her reflection showing a vision in ivory silk, in Belgian lace. At 23, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that needed no enhancement: dark chocolate eyes, raven black hair cascading in gentle waves, and porcelain skin that seemed to glow from within. Yet today, those beautiful eyes held no joy, only resignation. "You look absolutely radiant, darling," Margaret Rosewood proclaimed as she adjusted her daughter's veil for the 10th time. The older woman's sharp features were set in determination, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe chignon that matched her personality perfectly. "Jonathan Blackstone is the catch of the century. You should be grateful." Natalia's fingers trembled as she touched the pearl necklace at her throat, a wedding gift from her groom-to-be. The pearls felt cold against her skin, much like everything else about this arrangement. "Mama, I barely know him. We've only met 3 times. Love is a luxury we cannot afford," Margaret replied curtly, smoothing down her expensive navy dress. "Your father's business is drowning in debt. This marriage will save our family from ruin and secure your future with one of the wealthiest men in the country." Through the tall windows, Natalia could see the gardens where she had played as a child, where she had dreamed of meeting her Prince Charming and falling deeply in love. Those innocent dreams seemed like a lifetime ago now. It's buried under the weight of family obligations and financial desperation. The billionaire. Groom Jonathan Blackstone adjusted his platinum cufflinks as he stood in the marble-lined groom suite, his reflection revealing a man who commanded attention wherever he went. At 29, he had built Blackstone Industries from a small tech startup into a global empire worth billions. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw strong and clean-shaven, and his piercing blue eyes held the confidence of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "Still time to back out," his best friend and business partner Michael Chen joked as he handed Jonathan a glass of vintage champagne. "Though I have to say, you're getting a beautiful bride out of this deal." Jonathan stared out at the gathering. Crowd below, senators, celebrities, business moguls, and society's elite. Everyone who mattered was here to witness this union. It's not about backing out, Mike. It's about expansion into the European markets. Thomas Rosewood's connections are exactly what Blackstone Industries needs, and the girl is just a bonus. Michael observed with a knowing smile. Jonathan paused, remembering his brief encounters with Natalia. She had been polite but distant, speaking only when spoken to, her eyes always focused somewhere else. There was something mysterious about her that intrigued him, something vulnerable hiding beneath her composed exterior. "She's not what I expected," he admitted quietly. The ceremony of duty, the processional music began, and 300 guests rose to their feet as Natalia appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. Thomas Rosewood, once a proud businessman, now looked aged beyond his 55 years, the stress of financial ruin etched in the lines around his eyes. His hand trembled slightly as he held his daughter's arm. Knowing he was trading her happiness for his family's survival, Natalia walked slowly down the aisle, her eyes fixed on the elaborate altar ahead rather than on the man waiting for her. There, each step felt like walking toward a beautiful prison, golden bars that would cage her dreams forever. The guests murmured appreciatively at her beauty, but she heard none of it. Lost in her own thoughts, Jonathan watched her approach. Struck by her ethereal grace despite the obvious tension in her shoulders, when their eyes finally met, he saw fear flickering in those dark depths, carefully masked but unmistakable to someone who understood the art of reading people. For a moment, he felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been guilt. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows that felt anything but traditional to the bride and groom. Natalia's voice was barely above a whisper as she promised to love, honor, and cherish a man she barely knew. Jonathan's responses were confident and clear, spoken like the business agreements he negotiated daily. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was brief and formal, witnessed by hundreds, but felt by neither. The reception and growing unease. The reception that followed was a spectacular display of wealth and influence. The newlyweds sat at the head table like beautiful mannequins. smiling and nodding as an endless stream of guests offered congratulations and business propositions disguised as well wishes. Natalia barely touched her food, her stomach churning with anxiety about what the night would bring. "You're not eating," Jonathan observed quietly during a brief lull in the congratulations. It was the first personal comment he had made to her all evening. "I'm not very hungry," Natalia replied, her voice soft and melodic despite her nervousness. She glanced at him sideways, noting how at ease he seemed with all the attention and social maneuvering. This was his world: power, money, and influence. She felt like an imposter in a designer gown. "The band is quite good," he tried again, searching for common ground. "Do you enjoy dancing?" Natalia looked out at the couples swaying to the romantic melody, their faces glowing with genuine happiness and love. "I used to," she answered honestly, remembering carefree nights dancing in her room to music only she could hear. Jonathan studied her profile, intrigued by the sadness that seemed to emanate from her despite the celebration surrounding them. "Perhaps we should make an appearance on the dance floor." People expected. The word expect hit Natalia like a cold splash of water. Everything about this day, this marriage, was about meeting other people's expectations. She nodded silently and allowed him to lead her to the center of the ballroom, where they swayed together like strangers pretending to be lovers. The wedding night revelation, as the reception wound down and the last guests departed, Natalia found herself alone with Jonathan in the limousine that would take them to his penthouse apartment overlooking the city. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the distant sounds of traffic. "My home has several guest rooms," Jonathan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "You can choose whichever one you prefer." Natalia turned to look at him in surprise. "Guest rooms? I assumed you would want your own space," he continued, his business-like tone returning. "This arrangement is new for both of us. There's no need to rush into anything you're not comfortable with." Relief flooded through Natalia so powerfully that she had to blink back tears. She'd spent weeks dreading this night, imagining scenarios that terrified her innocent mind. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jonathan noticed the tears she was trying to hide and felt that strange pang of guilt again. Whatever he had expected from this marriage, a terrified bride had not been part of the plan. "Natalia," he said gently, using her name for perhaps the first time all day. "This doesn't have to be difficult. We can take things slowly." The penthouse prison, Jonathan's penthouse, was a masterpiece of modern architecture and design, spanning the entire top floor of a building he owned in the heart of the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline, while priceless artwork adorned the walls and luxurious furniture filled the spacious rooms. It was beautiful, impressive, and utterly intimidating to a girl who had grown up in a modest family home. "Your room is this way," Jonathan said, leading her down a hallway lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than her father's annual salary. He opened the door to reveal a stunning guest suite, complete with its own sitting area, marble bathroom, and walk-in closet. "I had some clothes sent over based on your measurements from the wedding dress. If you need anything else, just let me know." Natalia stepped into the room, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding her. Everything was perfect, elegant, and completely foreign to her simple tastes. "It's beautiful," she managed to say, though the words felt hollow. "Good night, Natalia," Jonathan said from the doorway. "Sleep well." As the door closed behind him, Natalia sank onto the silk-covered bed and finally allowed the tears to fall. She was now Mrs. Jonathan Blackstone, one of the wealthiest women in the country, living in a palace most people could only dream of. So then did she feel like she had lost everything that mattered? The first entry that night, Natalia sat at the antique writing desk by the window, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. She opened the leather-bound journal that had been her constant companion since childhood, a gift from her grandmother who had always encouraged her to write down her thoughts and dreams. With trembling fingers, she began to write. "Day 1, as Mrs. Blackstone. I am married to a stranger who treats me with the same professional courtesy he probably shows his business associates. He is handsome, wealthy, and powerful, everything a woman should want, according to Mama. But he doesn't know that I have never even held hands with a man before today. He doesn't know that the thought of physical intimacy terrifies me because Mama always said it was something women endure rather than enjoy. He doesn't know that I paint watercolors in secret because Mama says art is a waste of time for a proper wife. He doesn't know anything about who I really am beneath this designer gown and perfect makeup. How can I share a life with someone who doesn't know my soul? As she wrote, Natalia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The diary had always been her safe space, the one place where she could be completely honest about her thoughts and feelings. She closed the journal and hid it carefully in the bottom drawer of the desk. Beneath some decorative papers, the pattern begins the next morning. Jonathan knocked softly on her door and invited her to join him for breakfast. Natalia appeared in one of the elegant outfits he had provided, cream-colored dress that highlighted her natural beauty, but made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "Did you sleep well?" he asked politely as they sat at opposite ends of a dining table that could easily seat 12 people. "Yes, thank you," Natalia replied, though she had actually lain awake for hours staring at the ceiling and wondering what her life had become. Jonathan studied her over his morning coffee, noting the dark circles under her eyes that expertly applied makeup couldn't quite hide. "I have meetings most of today, but I thought perhaps we could have dinner together tonight, start getting to know each other properly." The suggestion was reasonable, even thoughtful, but Natalia felt a flutter of panic in her chest. Getting to know each other meant opening up, sharing personal thoughts and feelings, and eventually leading to the physical intimacy that all married couples were expected to share. "That sounds nice," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. That evening, they shared a beautifully prepared dinner served by Jonathan's discreet household staff. The conversation was polite but stilted, covering safe topics like the weather, current events, and her impressions of the city. When Jonathan suggested they watch a movie together afterward, Natalia excused herself with a claim of exhaustion. For the next week, the pattern repeated itself. Jonathan would make thoughtful gestures, bringing her flowers, suggesting activities they could do together, trying to draw her into conversation about her interests and dreams. Each time, Natalia would respond politely but maintain careful distance, always finding reasons to retire to her room early or avoid situations that might lead to intimacy. Jonathan's growing frustration by the 8th night of their marriage. Jonathan's patience was beginning to wear thin. He stood in his study, staring out at the city lights, and trying to understand the woman he had married. In business, he could read people like open books, anticipating their moves and motivations. But Natalia remained a complete mystery to him. He had expected many things from this arranged marriage: a social partnership, someone to accompany him to important events, perhaps eventually a family to carry on the Blackstone name. What he had not expected was to be married to a ghost who floated through his home like a beautiful, untouchable spirit. Every night, she retreated to her room with some polite excuse. Every morning, she emerged perfectly dressed and composed, ready to play the role of the dutiful wife in public but maintaining an invisible wall between them in private. Jonathan was beginning to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake in agreeing to this arrangement as he prepared for bed that night. Jonathan found himself staring at the closed door of Natalia's room down the hallway. Behind that door was his wife, a woman he was legally bound to, but emotionally shut out from. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Blackstone, a man who had conquered boardrooms and built an empire through sheer determination, felt completely powerless. Neither of them knew that in her room, Natalia was writing in her diary again, pouring out her confusion and growing guilt about her behavior toward a man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. Neither of them realized that these first 8 nights of careful distance were only the beginning of a much longer journey that would test them both in ways they never imagined. The golden cage was beautiful, but it was still a cage, and both the bird and its keeper were beginning to feel trapped by the very arrangement they had entered so willingly. 9 days had passed since their wedding, and the invisible barrier between Natalia and Jonathan seemed to grow thicker with each sunset. Jonathan found himself working later hours at his office, partly to avoid the awkward tension that filled their penthouse each evening. Blackstone Industries was thriving under his leadership, but his personal life felt like a business deal gone. Wrong Natalia spent her days exploring the massive penthouse like a beautiful ghost. She discovered Jonathan's extensive library filled with books on technology, business, and surprisingly classical literature. His grand piano sat untouched. In the corner of the living room, its black surface reflecting the city lights that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, everything in the apartment spoke of success and sophistication. But nothing felt like home to her. On the 10th night, Jonathan decided to make another attempt at connection. He came home early and found Natalia sitting by the window, sketching, in a small notebook. The late afternoon sun caught the highlights in her dark hair, and for a moment he was struck by how truly beautiful she was. "What are you drawing?" he asked gently, approaching her chair with careful steps. Natalia quickly closed the notebook and clutched it to her chest. "Nothing important," she said, her cheeks flushing pink with embarrassment. "Just silly doodles." Jonathan noticed how she protected the notebook like it contained state secrets. "I'd love to see your work sometime. I have an appreciation for art." "It's really not very good," Natalia insisted, standing up and smoothing down her pale blue dress. "I should start preparing dinner." "The staff can handle dinner," Jonathan said, gesturing toward the kitchen where his household employees were already working. "I thought perhaps we could really talk about our future together." The word future sent a chill down Natalia's spine. She had been living day by day, avoiding thoughts of what this marriage would ultimately require of her. "I'm quite tired," she said, the familiar excuse falling from her lips like a well-rehearsed line. "Perhaps tomorrow." Jonathan watched her retreat to her room once again, and this time, frustration flared in his chest. He was a patient man in business. But this marriage was testing limits he didn't know he had. The business gala challenge the following week brought an unexpected complication. Jonathan received an invitation to the annual Blackstone Industries charity gala, an event he had forgotten about in the whirlwind of his sudden marriage. The gala was crucial for his business relationships and philanthropic image. "Anija. To attend this with me?" Jonathan explained to Natalia over breakfast on day 15 of their marriage. He slid the elegant invitation across the marble table. "It's important for both our families' reputations." Natalia read the gold-embossed invitation with growing anxiety. A gala, with hundreds of people, about 300 of the city's most influential citizens, Jonathan confirmed. "We'll need to present ourselves as a united couple, dance together, mingle with guests, show the world that our marriage is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Successful." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their marriage was many things, but successful wasn't one of them. Preparing for the performance the day of the gala, Jonathan arranged for a team of stylists to help Natalia prepare. She emerged from her room that evening looking like a goddess draped in midnight blue silk. The gown hugged her curves perfectly, and diamonds sparkled at her throat and ears. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck. Jonathan felt his breath catch when he saw her. "You looked absolutely stunning," he said, and for the first time, his compliment sounded genuine rather than polite. Natalia felt heat rise in her cheeks under his intense gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, unused to such focused male attention. In the limousine ride to the hotel, Jonathan briefed her on the important guests they would meet. "Remember, we're newlyweds deeply in love," he said, with a bitter edge to his voice. "Try to look happy when photographers are around." The gala performance, the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, was transformed into a glittering wonderland of crystal chandeliers, white roses, and soft golden lighting. As Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Blackstone made their entrance, all eyes turned to admire the stunning couple. Cameras flashed as society photographers captured what they believed was a fairy tale romance. Jonathan kept his hand on the small of Natalia's back as they moved through the crowd, introducing her to business partners, politicians, and socialites. To outside observers, they appeared to be the perfect power couple. He confident and protective, she elegant and gracious. "It's Mrs. Blackstone, you're even more beautiful than the wedding photos suggested," commented Senator Williams, an elderly man with kind eyes. "Your husband is a very lucky man." "Thank you, Senator," Natalia replied with a genuine smile. "Jonathan speaks of you often." She surprised herself by how easily the social graces came to her. Despite her nervousness, She found herself enjoying some of the conversations, particularly with the wives of Jonathan's business associates who shared stories about art, travel, and charitable causes. The dance that changed everything when the orchestra began playing romantic melodies. Jonathan offered Natalia his hand. "Shall we dance?" Mrs. Blackstone was on the dance floor, surrounded by other couples. Something shifted between them. Jonathan's hand was warm and steady on her waist, his other hand gently holding hers. As they moved together to the soft music, Natalia felt herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. "You're a lovely dancer," Jonathan murmured near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "My grandmother taught me," Natalia found herself sharing. "She said dancing was like painting with your body." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Jonathan said, spinning her gracefully before drawing her back into his arms. For those few minutes on the dance floor, they forgot about the cameras, the expectations, and the careful walls they had built between them. They were simply a man and woman moving together in perfect harmony, and for the first time, their smiles were genuine. The spell was broken when the music ended and reality returned. But something had changed in those brief moments, a crack in the ice that had frozen their relationship. The art discovery the next morning, Jonathan found himself thinking about Natalia's comment about her grandmother and dancing like painting. Curious about the woman he had married, he decided to learn more about her interests. While she was out shopping with the personal assistant he had provided, Jonathan took the liberty of exploring her room. He felt guilty about the invasion of privacy, but he justified it as trying to understand his wife better. In her closet, behind the designer clothes he had purchased, he found a small easel and a collection of watercolor paintings that took his breath away. The paintings were exquisite. Delicate flowers that seemed to glow with inner light, landscapes that captured emotions rather than just scenery, and portraits of people with eyes full of stories. Each piece showed incredible talent and sensitivity. When Natalia returned home that afternoon, she found Jonathan standing in the living room with several of her paintings displayed on the coffee table. "Where did you find these?" she asked her, voice barely above a whisper. "In your closet," Jonathan admitted. "Natalia, these are incredible. You're not just talented, you're gifted." Natalia felt exposed, as if he had read her most private thoughts. "Please put them back," she said, reaching for the paintings. "They're just amateur attempts." Oh. Jonathan gently caught her wrist. "These are museum quality. Have you ever shown them to anyone?" "My mother says art is impractical for a wife," Natalia said, avoiding his eyes. "She says I should focus on more important things now." "Your mother is wrong," Jonathan said firmly. "This talent shouldn't be hidden away like a shameful secret." For a moment, Natalia looked at him with something that might have been hope. But then the familiar fear returned and she pulled away. "Please, just put them back." The mother's destructive. Visiting day 20 of their marriage, Margaret Rosewood made an unannounced visit to the penthouse. She arrived like a storm front, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the luxurious apartment and finding fault wherever possible. "Natalia, darling, you look thin," Margaret announced, kissing her daughter's cheek with cold lips. "Are you not eating properly? A wife must maintain her appearance." Jonathan, who had taken the afternoon off to spend time with Natalia, greeted his mother-in-law politely. "Mrs. Rosewood, what a pleasant surprise." Margaret's smile was as sharp as broken glass. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by. I wanted to see how my daughter is adjusting to married life." Over tea in the formal living room, Margaret dominated the conversation with comments about proper wifely behavior, social expectations, and thinly veiled criticisms of everything from Natalia's posture to her choice of afternoon dress. "A successful marriage requires a woman to know her place," Margaret lectured, her eyes fixed on Jonathan as if seeking his approval. "Too much independence can be, troublesome for a husband." Jonathan felt anger building in his chest as he watched. Natalia shrank under her mother's words. "I actually appreciate Natalia's independence," he said carefully. "She's intelligent and talented." Margaret's laugh was like ice cracking. "Talented? Oh, you mean those little paintings she insists on doing? I keep telling her that such hobbies are inappropriate now that she has real responsibilities." I think her art is extraordinary, Jonathan said firmly. Art doesn't keep a husband happy or a household running, Margaret replied, her tone suggesting. The conversation was over. The almost kiss after Margaret left. Natalia sat in her room, staring at her hands and fighting back tears. Jonathan found her there an hour later, looking small and defeated in the large chair by the window. Your mother has very strong opinions, he said carefully, settling into the chair across from her. She's always been that way, Natalia whispered. She says she's protecting me from making mistakes. What do you think? Jonathan asked gently. Natalia looked up at him with eyes full of confusion and pain. I don't know what to think anymore. Everything I was taught about being a proper wife seems to make you unhappy. But when I try to be myself, I feel like I'm disappointing everyone. Jonathan moved to kneel beside her chair, his blue eyes serious and kind. Natalia, the only person you need to please in this marriage is yourself. I married you, not your mother's idea of what you should be. But what if who I really am isn't what you need in a wife? Natalia asked, her voice breaking slightly. Then we'll figure it out together, Jonathan said softly, reaching up to touch her cheek. But first you have to trust me enough to show me who you really are. Something in his voice, in the gentle way he touched her face, made Natalia's heart race. For a moment, the careful walls between them seemed to dissolve. Jonathan leaned closer, his eyes asking permission, and Natalia felt herself nodding slightly. Their lips were almost touching when the sound of the doorbell rang through the apartment, followed by the housekeeper announcing another visitor. The spell was broken, and Natalia pulled back, her cheeks flaming with embarrassment. I should, the visitor, she stammered, standing up quickly and smoothing her dress. Jonathan watched her flee from the room, his own heart pounding with frustration. And something deeper. A growing desire to truly know and protect the woman he had married. The final nights of distance, the almost kiss changed. Everything and nothing. In the days that followed, both Natalia and Jonathan found themselves acutely aware of each other in new ways. Jonathan noticed how Natalia's eyes lingered on him during breakfast, how she seemed to choose her words more carefully, how she sometimes caught herself staring at his hands or his mouth. Natalia found herself thinking about that moment when she should have been sleeping. She remembered the warmth of his hand on her cheek, the intensity in his blue eyes, the way her heart had raced when he leaned closer. But with those new feelings came even greater fear. On night 21, when Jonathan suggested they have dinner on the balcony under the stars, Natalia agreed but spent the entire meal so nervous she could barely eat. When he complimented her appearance, she blushed so deeply that Jonathan couldn't help but smile. Are you feeling all right? He asked with gentle concern. You seem different tonight? I'm fine, Natalia said quickly, but her hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. Night 22 brought another attempt at connection when Jonathan invited her to play the piano with him. Natalia revealed she could play simple melodies, and for a brief moment, they sat side by side on the piano bench, their hands occasionally brushing as they played together. The innocent contact sent electricity through both of them, but when the song ended, Natalia quickly excused herself. By night 23, Jonathan's patience was hanging by a thread. They were living like polite strangers, and the growing attraction between them only made the distance more painful. He had tried everything he could think of to connect with his wife, but she continued to retreat behind her walls of propriety and fear. That night, as Natalia once again excused herself early and disappeared into her room, Jonathan stood alone in his living room, feeling more isolated than he had ever felt in his life. He was married to a woman who intrigued him, attracted him, and frustrated him in equal measure. Tomorrow would mark 24 days of marriage, and he was no closer to understanding her than he had been on their wedding day. In her room, Natalia wrote in her diary with trembling hands, Day 23. I almost let him kiss me today during our piano duet. When his hand touched mine, I felt things I've never experienced before. My heart raced, my skin felt warm, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to turn toward him and let whatever was going to happen, happen. But then I remembered Mama's warnings about men and their needs, about how women who enjoy such things are not respected, about how I must be careful not to appear too eager or available. I'm so confused. Jonathan seems kind and patient, but what if that changes if I give in to these feelings? What if he loses respect for me? What if I'm terrible at being intimate and disappoint him? I've never even been properly kissed. How can I be a real wife to a man who probably has so much experience with sophisticated women? It's better to keep my distance, even though it's getting harder every day. As she closed the diary and hid it in its secret place, Natalia had no idea that tomorrow night would bring the discovery that would change everything between them. Neither she nor Jonathan knew that their careful dance of attraction and avoidance was about to come to an explosive end, forcing them both to confront the truth about their feelings and their future together. The ice walls were beginning to crack, but it would take something dramatic to shatter them completely and reveal the fire that had been burning beneath the surface all along. Day 24 of their marriage dawned gray and rainy, matching Jonathan's increasingly dark mood. He had spent another sleepless night wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. His business empire was thriving, but his personal life felt like a carefully orchestrated failure. That afternoon, while Natalia was visiting her father at the hospital for a routine checkup following his recent heart procedure, Jonathan found himself pacing the empty penthouse like a caged animal. He had tried everything he could think of to connect with his wife, but she remained as elusive as morning mist. Frustrated and seeking some kind of understanding, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. He walked to Natalia's room, telling himself he just wanted to understand what made her retreat from him night after night. The room was immaculate, as always, but something caught his eye. In her haste to leave for the hospital, Natalia had left her writing desk drawer slightly open. A corner of familiar leather peeked out from beneath some papers. Jonathan hesitated for a long moment, his conscience warring with his desperate need for answers. Finally, his frustration won out, and he carefully retrieved the leather-bound journal, reading her soul with trembling hands. Jonathan opened the diary to the first entry and began to read. What he discovered in those pages shattered every assumption he had made about his wife and their marriage. Day 1 is Mrs. Blackstone. I am married to a stranger who treats me with professional courtesy, doesn't know that I have never even held hands with a man before today. He doesn't know that the thought of physical intimacy terrifies me because Mama always said it was something women endure rather than enjoy. Jonathan's heart clenched as he continued reading, each entry revealing more of Natalia's inner turmoil. Day 7. Jonathan brought me flowers today, white roses that smell like heaven. He asked about my interests, my dreams, and I wanted so badly to tell him about my paintings, about how I see colors in music and emotions in landscapes. But Mama's voice in my head reminds me that proper wives don't burden their husbands with such frivolous matters. Day 12. We danced at the gala tonight, and for a few moments I forgot to be afraid. In his arms I felt beautiful and wanted and safe, but then the music ended and reality returned. How can I tell him that I've never been kissed, that I don't know how to be the sophisticated woman he probably expected to marry? Day 18. Jonathan found my paintings today. He said they were museum quality, that I was gifted. No one has ever spoken about my art that way. For a moment, I saw myself through his eyes, not as the disappointing daughter my mother raised, but as someone with value beyond my ability to be a proper wife. It scared me how much I wanted to believe him. With each page, Jonathan felt his anger transforming into something else entirely. This wasn't the rejection of a cold, unfeeling wife. This was the terrified response of an innocent young woman, who had been taught to fear her own desires and doubt her own worth. Day 23. I almost let him kiss me today. When his hand touched mine on the piano keys, I felt things I've never experienced before. But then I remembered all of Mama's warnings about women who appear too eager to available. What if Jonathan loses respect for me if I show how much I'm beginning to care for him? What if I'm terrible at intimacy and disappoint him? I've never even been properly kissed. How can I be a real wife to a man who has probably been with sophisticated, experienced women? The confrontation of truth when Natalia returned from the hospital that evening. She found Jonathan waiting for her in the living room. Her diary lay open on the coffee table between them, and her face went white as she realized what had happened. You read it? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I had to know, Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion. I had to understand what I was doing wrong, because I was going crazy trying to figure out how to reach you. Natalia wrapped her arms around herself protectively. Now you know the truth. I'm not the sophisticated wife you deserved. I'm just a scared little girl playing dress-up in designer clothes. Jonathan stood up slowly, his blue eyes intense and filled with an emotion Natalia couldn't quite identify. Do you know what I read in these pages? Natalia shook her head too, humiliated to speak. I read about a woman who sees beauty everywhere she looks, who paints emotions that most people can't even name, who cares so deeply about doing the right thing that she's willing to sacrifice her own happiness. Jonathan stepped closer. I read about a woman who has been taught to be ashamed of her own feelings, her own desires, her own incredible talents. I don't know how to be what you need, Natalia said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know how to be intimate. I don't know how to be a real wife. Jonathan reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands. Natalia, look at me. Reluctantly, she lifted her eyes to meet his. I don't want you to be anything other than exactly who you are, Jonathan said fiercely. I don't want a wife who knows all the right moves. I want the woman who paints flowers that seem to glow with inner light. I want the woman who blushes when I compliment her. I want the woman who has the courage to trust me with her fears. The gentle education, but I don't know anything about being intimate with a man, Natalia confessed, her voice breaking. What? If I disappoint you? Jonathan's smile was tender and patient. Then we'll learn together. Natalia, there's no rush. There's no timeline we have to follow. This is our marriage, and we get to decide how it unfolds. You don't understand, Natalia said desperately. I've never even been properly kissed. I don't know how to please a man. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or feel or want. And let me teach you, Jonathan said softly. Not because you have to learn, but because you want to. When you're ready, if you're ready, Natalia studied his face, searching for signs of impatience or disappointment, but found only kindness and something that looked remarkably like love. You would do that? You would be patient with someone so inexperienced? Natalia, Jonathan said, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. Your inexperience isn't a flaw to be overcome. It's a gift that you choose whether or not to share. If you choose to share it with me, I will treasure it and you more than you can imagine. The first real kiss, I'm scared, Natalia whispered, but she didn't pull away from his touch. I know, Jonathan said, but you don't have to be scared of me. I would never hurt you or pressure you or make you feel ashamed of what you feel. What if I don't know what I'm doing? Jonathan smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Natalia had seen on his face since their wedding day. Then I'll show you, but only if you want to learn. Natalia took a shaky breath, thinking about all the entries in her diary where she had written about wanting to trust him, wanting to let down her walls, wanting to discover what it felt like to be truly close. To another person, I think I would like to learn, she said so quietly, that Jonathan had to lean closer to hear her. Are you sure? He asked, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Instead of answering with words, Natalia rose up on her tiptoes and brushed her lips against his in the briefest, most innocent of kisses. Jonathan's eyes closed at the sweet contact, his heart racing with the trust she was showing him. When she started to pull away, he followed her movement, deepening the kiss just slightly, showing her how to move her lips with his, how to breathe through the connection, how to let herself feel the warmth and pleasure without fear. When they finally separated, Natalia's eyes were wide with wonder. That was different than I expected. Good different or bad different? Though her expression already told him the answer. Very good different, Natalia admitted, her cheeks pink with a blush that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with awakening desire. Over the following weeks, Jonathan proved true to his word, courted his own wife with a patience and tenderness that gradually melted away years of fear and conditioning. He brought her art supplies and encouraged her to paint in the penthouses, sun-filled rooms. He asked about her dreams and actually listened to her answers. He showed her that physical affection could be gentle and wonderful rather than something to be endured. Their first real conversation about intimacy happened one evening as they sat together on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in. The same vibrant colors Natalia captured in her watercolors. My mother told me that good wives submit to their husbands' needs but don't expect to enjoy it themselves, Natalia said quietly, her hand in Jonathan's as they watched the city lights begin to twinkle below. Jonathan felt anger flash through him at Margaret Rosewood's destructive teachings. But he kept his voice calm. Your mother was wrong about many things, but she was especially wrong about that. Intimacy between a husband and wife should bring pleasure to both of them. It should be something you look forward to, not something you endure. Really, Natalia? Asked, turning to look at him with curious eyes. Really, Jonathan confirmed, bringing her hand to his lips to kiss her palm gently. When we make love for the first time, whenever that is, it will be because we both want it, and it will be good for both of us. I promise you that. The night everything changed, 6 weeks after their wedding, Natalia made a decision that would complete their transformation from strangers to soulmates. She had been painting in the living room when Jonathan came home from work, and instead of her usual polite greeting and quick retreat, she looked up at him with new confidence in her dark eyes. Jonathan, she said, setting down her brush, think I'm ready to be your real wife. Jonathan felt his heart stop and then race. Are you sure? We don't have to rush anything? Natalia stood up and walked over to him, placing her hands on his chest. I've been thinking about what you said about intimacy being something to look forward to rather than endure. I've been thinking about how patient and kind you've been, how you've never made me feel ashamed or pressured. I've realized that I do look forward to it. I look forward to being close to you, to learning what it means to love someone completely. Jonathan cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes to make sure she was certain. I love you, Natalia. But not because you're finally ready for this, but because of who you are, your courage, your talent, your beautiful heart. I love you too, Natalia said, the words coming easily for the first time in her life. Will you show me how to love you properly? The wedding night they should have had. What followed was everything a wedding night should be: tender, passionate, and full of discovery. Jonathan kept his promise to make it good for both of them, taking his time to show Natalia that her body was capable of incredible pleasure, that her desires were not shameful, but beautiful, that love between a husband and wife was one of life's greatest gifts. Natalia discovered that intimacy was not the frightening duty her mother had described, but a joyful expression of the love that had grown between them. She learned that she was not broken or inadequate, but a passionate woman who had finally found a man worthy of her trust. The happy ending, months later. As Natalia prepared for her first art exhibition in a prestigious downtown gallery, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared, repressed young woman who had married Jonathan Blackstone for duty was gone, replaced by a confident artist and beloved wife. Are you nervous? Jonathan asked, straightening his tie as he prepared to escort her to the gallery opening. A little, Natalia admitted, admiring her reflection in the mirror. She wore a stunning red dress that highlighted her natural beauty, and her eyes sparkled with the confidence of a woman who knew she was loved. But mostly I'm excited. Your grandmother would be so proud, Jonathan said, coming up behind her to fasten a necklace of diamonds and rubies around her throat. His anniversary gift to celebrate their first year of marriage? I think she would, Natalia agreed, leaning back against his chest. She always told me that the right person would love all of me. My art, my dreams, my fears, everything. She was a wise woman, Jonathan murmured, kissing the side of her neck in a way that still made Natalia's pulse race. After all these months, at the gallery that night, Natalia's paintings drew crowds of admirers and several offers from collectors. But the moment that mattered most to her was when she spotted her mother in the crowd, looking stunned as she stared at a painting of the garden where Natalia had played as a child. It's beautiful, Natalia, Margaret said quietly when her daughter approached. I never realized I was wrong to discourage this. It's never too late to support the people we love, Natalia replied gently, having long since forgiven her mother's misguided attempts at protection. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Jonathan and Natalia stood together in front of her favorite painting, a portrait of two dancers moving together, in perfect harmony, their faces glowing with love and trust. No more guest rooms? Jonathan asked teasingly, remembering those first difficult weeks of their marriage. No more guest rooms, Natalia confirmed, turning in his arms to face him. No more walls between us. Just us, for the rest of our lives. When they kissed under the gallery lights, surrounded by the art that told the story of Natalia's journey from fear to love. Both of them knew they had found something infinitely more valuable than the business arrangement that had brought them together. They had found true love, the kind that grows stronger with each passing day and makes even the darkest moments bright with possibility. Their marriage had begun with duty and distance, but it had transformed into something beautiful, passionate, and eternal. The virgin bride, who had rejected her husband for 24 nights, had become the beloved wife who would never spend another night apart from the man who had taught her that love was not something to endure, but something to celebrate every single day. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the penthouse as 3-year-old Thomas Jonathan Blackstone chased his baby sister Emma through the rooms, both of them squealing with delight. Natalia watched from her easel in the sun-filled art studio Jonathan had created for her, one hand resting on her growing belly where their third child was developing. Still painting flowers? Jonathan observed, coming up behind her to wrap his arms around her waist. They're not just flowers anymore, Natalia said, leaning back against him as she gestured toward the canvas. They're love stories. Each one tells the story of something beautiful that grew from what seemed like impossible circumstances. Jonathan looked at the painting, a garden scene where delicate flowers bloomed among what appeared to be broken stone and twisted metal. Their beauty, made all the more striking by the harsh environment they had overcome. Like us, he said softly. Like us, Natalia agreed, turning in his arms to kiss the man who had taught her that the most beautiful love stories often begin with the most unlikely circumstances. Outside their windows, the city sparkled with evening lights, but inside their home, the real light came from the love that had transformed strangers into soulmates, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind the strongest walls, waiting for the right person to find the key that unlocks them forever. The ND.